Hemisphere's first day was a success. It opened precisely on time to the blast of cannon and the wail of Highland bagpipers.
The official dedication came at 10:30 a.m. when Mrs. Lyndon B. Johnson headed inaugural ceremonies in the arena at the brand new convention center. Hemisphere 68 was underway.
Are you going to Scarborough Fair?
It was a big, big deal. You could feel, even though you're here in San Antonio, you could feel the publicity the city was getting in other parts of the country. And at that time, the New York World's Fair was going on. Montreal had the World's Fair. So this was all a really big deal because Montreal was a big city, New York was a big city. Therefore, if we have a World's Fair in San Antonio, this would make this a big city.
San Antonio, host city to this great exposition. This monument demands courage and foresight.
Forget the last-minute problems. When Hemisphere opened its gates on April 6th, it was a big deal, especially to San Antonians. It put this city on the map, made local residents proud, and provided jobs for thousands of people, like Magic 105 radio newsman and San Antonian Stan Kelly.
Director of outdoor promotion.
Actually, Stan was
I was a barker, yeah.
Asking only workmen's wages, I come looking for a job.
Virtually every day of the fair, Stan welcomed thousands to Hemisphere. But on the 4th of July, Stan had his own day in the sun, literally. On a sweltering holiday, President Lyndon Baines Johnson came to Hemisphere. Stan Kelly shook his hand. The moment was captured forever by a quick newspaper photographer.
It's quite a memory I have.
It was a very moving experience to see him not as the president, but just as a fellow Texan who happened to be president. It was pretty neat.
Presidents and celebrities, tourists and others flocked to Hemisphere from across the United States. Some came looking for work.
A lot of people came to San Antonio 20 years ago to work at Hemisphere. Some of them stayed. A few became very successful. Like the two guys who run and own perhaps San Antonio's most famous restaurant.
Yeah, if it wasn't for Hemisphere, I don't know where I'd be today.
Joe Kozniak and friend Nick Pacelli came to San Antonio from Montreal. They intended to just work the Hemisphere. Joe worked in one of the beer gardens. Nick made pizza. But they ended up in San Antonio for good.
Hemisphere is the reason that we're here.
Nick and Joe are Hemisphere success stories. So is Stan Kelly. They speak of Hemisphere with fondness. The fair itself moved along smoothly. The Tower of the Americas and the U.S. Pavilion were two of the biggest attractions.
Confluence is also the theme at the United States Pavilion. The story of the blending together of many peoples and many cultures into one nation. It portrays the American cultural confluence in its three aspects: the legacy, the harvest, and the promise.
Then came the monorail crash. One person died. Several were injured. There were many eyewitnesses.
Talked to one of the drivers of the trains. What did he tell you?
He was the back driver, the driver of the back train, and his brakes went out.
Was he hurt badly?
Yes, he was hurt very badly, but he was going around to make sure everybody else was all right.
The crash was the fair's biggest black eye, but attendance remained steady, and the people who went to Hemisphere and worked there remember it as a special time.
I got a thirst for seeing the world from that. And since then, I've been to South America several times. I've been to Europe, and I've made friends in countries all over the world. And it started here. We learn about ourselves.
A time of innocence, a time of confidences.
Just recently, Hemisphere Plaza changed quite a bit from the way it was 20 years ago when the fair was here. But for most of the people who worked at Hemisphere in 1968, there remains this constant. Most of the memories they have of Hemisphere are good ones.
They're all great memories. They really are.
Coming up, the legacy of Hemisphere 20 years later.
Place what a U.S. Commerce Report described as a thriving, vigorous city. For San Antonio, 1968 was a very good year. Yet there was a downside. A summer full of rioting and unrest elsewhere left its mark on San Antonio. For the first time ever, a World's Fair was not a moneymaker. When Hemisphere lowered its flags, it left the city with a $6 million debt. You see, more than half the people visiting Hemisphere came from Texas, 23% from Bexar County alone, and only 4% of the crowds at this World's Fair were foreigners. Smaller crowds meant fewer dollars. But that problem seems small compared to what plagued the park for more than 15 years. There simply was no post-park plan. With years of energy tied into making Hemisphere a success, community leaders say there was simply nothing left to give.
The city then inherited the fairgrounds and didn't even know where the fuse boxes were or how to operate the site. So it was a mess. It was just an unholy mess.
The lack of organization seems almost laughable now. Hundreds of Hemisphere typewriters mysteriously disappeared within days of the park's closing. Signs showed up in strange places.
I have one of the signs that said Hemisphere Plaza this way with a symbol on it that miraculously came off of some lamppost legally into my hands.
And expensive artwork was literally trashed.
It was given by the Cato Foundation in honor of Mrs. Cato's mother. When it came time to close the fair, it wasn't recognized as an object of art, and it was destroyed. It was cut into pieces, apparently, and was taken to the city dump. And they ultimately found it, were thoroughly dismayed about this.
The McNay Museum saved this piece, but could do nothing for the park itself. Some wanted to sell the site. Others thought it should be a parking lot. In the meantime, handfuls of tourists got lost on land that used to hold hundreds.
In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone.
What was once a golden gem in the city's crown turned into a tarnished piece of costume jewelry. San Antonio still had the people, natives, and now tourists. Since '68, convention and tourism had emerged as a major new industry. Hemisphere's presence added dozens of new hotels to the city's registry and left San Antonio with a new convention center. Hemisphere was seen as a site to keep the crowds coming back.
The big problem was that whatever we did would cost money, and I always felt that whatever we did needed to be open to the public and free.
San Antonio wound up returning to its beginnings for the answer.
Here we are, centered in the middle of the brush country, the parched countryside of South Texas. And yet this is a city where water has become the central theme.
Water, what brought settlers to the missions and tourists to the Riverwalk, could once again be used to draw people back to the park.
Let's take the feeling that people get on the Riverwalk and transpose that onto these fairgrounds, and let's make the fairgrounds a celebration of water.
Recently, City Council got a sneak preview of Hemisphere's new look, and on April 6th, the public is invited to the dedication of downtown's latest development. Yet after all of this, as you can see, San Antonio is still not through with Hemisphere. Decisions must still be made on what to do with this part of the park. A developer's dream to tie in the southwest corner of Hemisphere with La Vita and make it a festival marketplace was dropped because of too much opposition and not enough money. These historic structures are still sagging under the weight of indecision while City Council plans its next move.
Our plans right now, for now, are simply to leave it as a natural area. Again, maybe a children's area or a place that's not too, not loud.
And it is possible water will once again prove the tie that binds. Water is what continues to chart San Antonio's course, from the Riverwalk extension to the River Center Mall to SeaWorld of Texas and Hemisfair Plaza.
It is the uniqueness of San Antonio, this theme. It's refreshing, it's green, it's cool, and it is the unifying theme that brings all of the elements of our city together.
And in what the mayor calls San Antonio's year of emergence, Hemisfair Plaza's rebirth is a major milestone.
Dominating the city's skyline as it has for 2 decades, Hemisphere is a symbol of San Antonio, even if its role has sometimes been in question. Now, on April 6th, 20 years to the day after the first opening of Hemisphere, the city will once again be celebrating, but this time the rebirth of an idea.
And where that idea will be 20 years from now is hard to say, except that most certainly Hemisphere will be at the very heart of San Antonio. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.